Section 3.4, planning, sounds obvious by name, but in the context of asset management, we need to take that a step further. We need to be looking at developing asset management plans that outline, of course, the activities, resources, the budgets and timelines and skills to do so, i.e. the full resourcing piece. We need to align with the strategic asset management plan or equivalent, because that represents what the organisation is setting out to do to address the organisational objectives, which is why the organisation exists. We need to be looking at the life cycle activities, risk, performance expectations. But when we talk about life cycle, bringing it back to there is a service life cycle, and there's also the asset life cycle that supports those services. Integrating with other organisational plans. The life cycle does not just sit there in isolation. We need to be doing that integration piece because, one, it's obviously good practice. We bring out the alignment principle of asset management, but also the integration also supports the whole coordinated activity of an organisation to realise value. And also reviewing and updating plans at a frequency that's going to address both risk and opportunity, so the plan isn't written once and forgotten. In any organisation, there's a risk that plans are developed, considered in isolation, in silos. Now, for a small organisation, or even a large organisation, that may be appropriate sometimes. But what we've got to make sure is plans align back with the organisation and really the financial plans that support that. So we can, again, consider this whole alignment piece by conducting workshops that bring in the different functions, the different cross-departmental heads, and actually look at what does integration mean. Am I actually creating a decision in one area of the business that's going to have a negative impact in another area of the business? Again, that life cycle approach will bring that alignment and make sure we're complementing our plans, not conflicting them. When planning, we do run the risk sometimes of making a plan too high level. It speaks to intent, but you really can't make actions from it. On the other hand, you can get into so much detail, over prescribing, it becomes too complex, and it just makes it hard for people to interpret and also to use. What we need to do is come back to first principles of planning. We are converting a reason into a pathway, that pathway into milestones into deliverables supported by activities and tasks. We need to be able to then write them in a way that suits the maturity of the organisation and, of course, the audience. So when we think of planning, please remember to make them with clarity and to make sure that they are also practical. It's one thing to have a plan, have direction, have commitment. But if we do not resource the plan effectively, it's not going to work. We need to make sure that if there are any competing demands for resources, and as you can see, it could be people, could be money, time, IT, processes, whatever it is, we can lead to delays, under delivery, frustrations, and sometimes conflict. So by coming up with a prioritization framework that generally should then lead back into your asset management objectives and strategic asset management plan, you can start to look at where the trade-offs could be, and you can do that with transparency. Once you start to do that with transparency, people start to focus on the outcome, and if there is a real need to resource something in any dimension, the organization will be more willing to do so because it's not done on the behalf of just one function of the business, it's done on behalf of the outcomes the business is seeking. It's one thing to have a plan, it stacks up, it's tangible, it's even resourced. But if no one's truly going to take responsibility for the delivery or accountability for the outcome for which the plan serves, you've got an issue. That's why it's so important when we turn to the old RACI matrix, which stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Sometimes there's an S in there too for supported. That way we can embed the ownership, and we can also then come up with performance measures, performance agreements. But ultimately, planning really won't get to the outcome unless someone owns the plan and someone's accountable for the outcome. When we set out to originally come up with a plan to translate that strategy into an outcome, we need to also be aware and accept the fact that things can change. So therefore, the word adaptability comes into play. So the risk here, the plan is so rigid, we can't change it. It's really stuck. The flip side to that is if the plan also is too loose, well, that also can actually lead to issues with adaptability. So we need to make sure the context, the risk, and the stakeholder needs, if they do change, we can pivot the plan or work within the plan, but the entire plan doesn't fall over. So again, those review cycles, having the correct contingency will actually help you with this. So there's a plan, it looks like it stacks up, and it sets out to deliver something. But the real risk here is if people who are the recipients of that plan or maybe working and supporting that plan feel like it's being done to them, not for them or with them, well, then you can actually then disengage employees or workers for that matter. So again, it might be seen as a top-down exercise, but a way around this, and again, to navigate through these issues, is to involve frontline teams with the planning process itself. That way you can navigate and understand the steps taken within the plan by way of milestones, what are the deliverables supporting the plan, and when it comes to activities and tasks, do we have the right amount of horsepower, man hours, etc. to do so, and therefore rebuild that employee engagement trust through that transparency of the planning process. So from an ISO perspective, whilst planning does cover quite a broad spectrum of the areas of the standard, the ones that stand out, of course, are 6.1. What are the actions to address both risk and opportunity? Because your planning wants to be underpinning that and addressing those. Asset management objectives and planning to achieve them in 6.2 is another key element and probably the most relevant of the ISO clauses in relation to planning more generally. And 6.3, planning of changes. This is recently introduced into the international standard and other management system standards for that matter. But not just talking about getting from point A to point B. Are we prepared? Are we ready to do so? So in summary, planning makes strategy real by defining what will be done, when will it be done, with what resources will it be done, and by whom. We should also remember that planning, as in the context of the global forum landscape, will also consider the strategic planning of the why, the tactical planning of the what, and the operational planning of the how.